I am just absolutely delighted to be here to talk to you guys tonight. I'm Janet Hicks, and she introduced me, but I do want to just kind of give a little plug to my program over at Belmont because we are such a new program, we want people to know we exist. So if you know of someone who's really stellar out there, who's looking to get a graduate degree in counseling, send them over to us. We would love to meet them, to talk to them. We have a brand new program that started in 2016. And we are now a CACREP accredited program. So I appreciate you letting me give that little plug to my program. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started with what you guys came to hear. All right, can everybody see the screen? Did it transfer okay? All right, thank you so much. I always worry about that. I'll be teaching a class and then all of a sudden my students will say, I can't even see what you've been talking about. So just want to make sure you're with me. All right, well, the title of the presentation tonight is Using Your Differences to Help and Not Harm Your Relationship. So tonight, I really want to talk about 5 things. And the 5 things I'm going to talk about are things that are going to help you to be able to understand your partner a little bit better and to be able to understand yourself a little bit better so that you learn to be a little bit more forgiving and to communicate a little more authentically with your partner. So those 5 things I'm going to start with is the first one is understanding personality differences. And then after that, we're going to move into improving communication differences. Number 3, adjusting differences in conflict responses. Number 4, we're going to learn to define love differently. And then hopefully number 5, I will give you a few things. I wish I could tell you I'm going to actually give you the key to happiness, but I'm going to give you a few things to think about that might make you have a better relationship and help with happiness anyway. So with that said, I always like, at Belmont, we are a program that we integrate Christianity into our teaching when we teach people to be counselors. So I always like to start with a scripture that kind of gives purpose to what we're doing. So I'm going to do that tonight, and this is one of my favorites. And you'll see why I picked it because of the pandemic that's been going on. You and your partner have probably been spending a lot more time together since last March. And there may be a little bit more conflict actually going on because you are spending a little bit more time together. So I love this scripture. With all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So hopefully when we finish tonight, you'll be able to say that you have learned a few things that have helped you to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace in your relationship. So let's start with personality differences. One of the things that people often don't realize is we will be fighting. Like I might be irritated at my husband who's here tonight because I'm sitting at the kitchen table and I'm talking to him and he doesn't hear me. And I'm thinking in my mind, he's being really rude. He's not paying any attention to me. How horrible. When in reality, when I began to understand his true personality, or what I refer to as his default personality, it dawned on me, he's not doing these things on purpose. So for you to learn a little bit about yourself, and if your partner's here tonight, maybe your partner can take this as well, or if they're not here, maybe after we leave, I will be happy to share this PowerPoint with Lauren. So if you want it, she will have a copy of it and you can get it from her. But you can take this little quiz that I'm going to give you and maybe learn a little bit about yourself, about your partner. After you do this, we're going to talk about what this means for your relationship. So humor me if you have a pencil. And what I would like for you to do is you'll see there's a choice A and then a whole lot of things listed. And then on the right-hand side, you see a choice B and several things listed. I would like for you to look at all of the items in choice A, all of the items in choice B, and even though they may not all totally describe you, I want you to pick the side, either A or B, that describes you overall the best. And then I want you to write down which one you've selected, either A or B. Then I want you to do the exact same thing for choice C or choice D.
Looking back and see which one connects with you.
And I know for some of you it's kind of hard because you're going, I'm not sure which one's really more me, but try to pick the side that is more like you. You have to pick one or the other.
Oh, A or B, okay.
So when I finish with this slide, everybody should have picked either choice A or choice B, and then they should also have picked either choice C or choice D. So you'll have two answers for this slide.
Pick you.
Pick B. I can't read
I
C or
picked
D.
A.
And don't worry, I'm going to be really patient because I know sometimes this takes just a little bit of thought.
Dr. Hicks, this is Lauren. I'm going to mute everybody else just so that everyone is aware of that. I'm going to mute all.
It's hard to decide which one.
Hosts.
Yeah. I guess I'm
I'll give you about 1 more minute to just look these over and make sure that you have two answer choices before I move on to the next slide.
So I think I'm A and C.
Hopefully everyone has had a chance to look over all 4 of these and they have 2 answers. So just for sake of time, knowing that if you didn't have a chance to look this over really carefully, that Lauren will have the PowerPoint, so don't panic. You can always go back. If you didn't have enough time, you can do it later. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move to the next slide. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to look at choice E, and I promise this is the last slide. We're not going to do this the whole presentation, I promise. It's the last one. Look at either choice E or choice F, and I want you to pick one of those two. And then I want you to look at choice G and choice H and pick one of those two. So again, you'll have 2 more answers. And I'll be very patient. I'll give you plenty of time to look these over. And so everybody knows there really are no right or wrong answers to this, just different answers. It's a no-fail quiz. All right, hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at those. So let's talk about what those mean and what they have to do with your relationship. So if you selected choice A as being most like you, I want you to write down or remember the letter E. If you selected choice B, I want you to remember letter I. Now, what those mean is if you selected choice A, basically what you're saying is that you are an extrovert. If you picked choice B, you're saying you're an introvert, hence the letter E or I. And I'm going to come back to it and explain what these mean and how they affect your communication and your relationship here in just a minute. But let's go ahead and look at the other answers. So right now, everyone should have either an E or an I remembered as the first letter of a four-letter code that we're putting together. So your second one, you had a choice. You either picked hold on, let me look at something real quick. You either picked C or D. So if you picked choice C, then you would remember the letter S. If you picked choice D, then you would remember the letter N like Nancy. And those letters stand for either S, sensory, or N, intuitive. They don't use the letter I because I guess that would get too confusing with our first choice of introversion. So for the word intuitive, they just use the letter N. So now everyone should have two letters written down, either an I or an E, or an N or an S. And then the third choice that you had was to choose either E or F on the quiz. If you chose letter E, then I want you to put a T as your third letter in your four-letter code that we're creating. If you chose the other side, I want you to put an F. That would have been choice F is an F. Now what those letters stand for is, as far as a personality type, you would either be a thinking personality type, which would be the T, or a feeling personality type, which would be an F. And then finally, the fourth letter and the fourth letter of our code, if you picked choice G, then you will put a J like Janet Hicks, a J on your paper as your fourth letter in your four-digit code. And if you picked choice H, you will put a P as in Paul as your fourth letter code. And those letters stand for either judging or perceiving. So now everyone should have a four-letter code. You either have an I or E as the first letter, an N or an S as the second letter, an F or a T for the third letter, and a J or a P for the fourth letter. So now let's talk about what this means and how this affects your communication in your relationship now that you have a four-letter code. First, we'll look at what each of the letters means. An I, if you are an introvert, there's often a lot of people out there who don't really, they talk about introversion or extroversion and they don't really know what it means. But an introvert, it just means how you get energy. It's like your battery. Do you get energy from being around people, which would be an extrovert, or do you get energy from being alone? There's a lot of misconceptions about this. Introverts don't dislike people. They just simply need time alone to be able to recharge their battery so that they're frankly not grouchy. Now, right now, what's happening in the pandemic is we have a lot of people out there who picked E as their first letter code, that this being quarantined was extremely difficult on extroverts. And introverts are not having such a hard time because they're actually using this time to recharge. Now, the way that that can affect you in a relationship, let me give you an example. I come home from work, and let's say I'm an extrovert, and I recharge my battery by going out and being around people. Well, if my partner is an introvert, they come home from work and they're exhausted and they need to spend time alone. So conflict can come up because I'm thinking, I just can't stay here. I need to go somewhere. I need to do something. Whereas an introvert is thinking, I need to stay home. I need to recharge before we can do this. So it's differences that we have to work out, and we often come up with compromises when we do that. And we'll come back to how we resolve some of these conflicts that we have when we get later on in this presentation. All right, so let's move to the N or the S and what those mean. If you're an intuitive person, well, let me start with sensory first. It's a little easier to explain. If you're a sensory person, the way you learn is through your 5 senses. You're the person when you were in school that when you had to dissect the frog, you were right up there, you were doing it. The person who is an intuitive was standing back watching. The sensory person learns through their 5 senses. They're the people that when you're driving down the road, you wave at them, they see you, they wave back. They don't miss a thing going on around them. And I will confess, I'm very much an intuitive type of person. Intuitive type people, they're like your absent-minded professors. I guess that's why I'm in the job that I'm in over at Belmont, a professor, because I'm absent-minded. But intuitive people, rather than learning and using the 5 senses, they are taking in information quickly and they're using it to create or apply to other things right away. If you're an intuitive type personality, you probably didn't hear anything I have said. You probably already shifted your brain to how do I use this later on? And you're already thinking about how you're going to apply some of these things. And you may or may not hear another thing I say. And you know what? That's okay, because intuitive people are very creative. Now, the way you get in trouble with this is I'm guilty of this. When my spouse comes in and he's talking to me, I'm in my head. And he's getting irritated at me because I don't listen. Because this is part of what I call my default personality code, it's not intentional. So he's very forgiving of me because he understands all of this and he knows that I'm not doing it because I'm disrespectful. I'm not doing it because I don't care about him. It just simply if I don't put a lot of thought into becoming sensory, I'm just in my head. That's just normally the way I am. So we have to cut our partner a lot of slack when they have a particular default personality code, because it's extremely difficult to remember to snap out of that if you're not boosted a little. So a sense of humor is good. You know, my spouse, he'll come in. If I'm in my head, he might just make a joke about it. There you are again, reading books in your head. And I come back, you know, and then it dawns on me, oh yeah, I need to pay attention to what he's saying to me. But it's never because I don't care about him. It's just my default personality. Then the third one is the thinking or the feeling. Some of you put an F, some of you put a T. Females are primarily, the majority of them are feeling type personalities. Males are primarily thinking type personalities. Now here's where we get in trouble. I'll be in a session with a couple and she's maybe crying and he's sitting and trying to be logical with her, because it's about how you make decisions. Someone who's a feeling type, the first default thing that pops into your head without thinking any more about it is, how will this affect other people? These people are very empathic. They love other people. They love making other people feel good. Whereas thinking people, they're not cold-hearted people. They just make decisions through logic. And often that logic doesn't make sense to a feeling type person. So you can get at odds with each other and have conflict, because if you're a feeling type person, you may think your partner doesn't have empathy for your position, when in reality they do. It's just their default. You just have to learn to, or maybe even sometimes have a code of, hey, you're doing it again. I need you to be where I am right now. And the final piece of your 4-letter code is J for judging or P for perceiving. If you wrote J on your paper, I don't know why they came up with these these codes of judging, because it really has nothing to do with judging anyone else. But judgers, let me give you an example. I have a very, very dear friend that we were going to go on a trip. We were going to go to Washington, D.C. She is a typical default P. I am a typical default J. J's like me, we planned everything in advance. We are always on time. You'll notice I was way early tonight for the presentation. That's because my default is a J. I mean, it would drive me crazy not to be 10 minutes early to something. Whereas my friend, time is a renewable resource to her. She really doesn't even think about that. She's a lot less stressed probably than I am. Each of these has positives and negatives. None are right, none are wrong. But when we were going on a trip, I get to the airport, I'm freaking out. You know, I'm there, I'm a J, I'm there an hour and a half early. Because they say you're supposed to. J's are rule followers. We do what the rules say we're supposed to do. P's, well, they figure there's gray areas and it'll work itself out. So you can see, I'm sitting at the airport. She arrives right before the plane takes off. I have my entire itinerary picked out for 3 days. I know exactly what hotel I'm staying in. I've had it booked for 6 months. She shows up, doesn't even know what hotel she's staying in, wants to know where I've stayed so she'd get a hotel. And you know, the truth is, it worked out fine for her. She's probably less stressed than I am. But it drove me crazy because as a J, I don't think like someone who's a P. And a P, I drive her crazy because she just says to me, you need to live a little. And she's probably right. I probably do. And she probably needs to show up a little earlier too. But my point in telling you this is people are in relationships that are J's who are with people who are P's. Neither one is right and neither one is wrong, but they can cause conflict for us. Now, if this interests you, for sake of time, I'm just going to go over what each of the 4 different letters mean. However, your 4-letter code, when you put it together, it's called a Myers-Briggs code. What it actually is, there are 16 of them. Some of them are extremely rare. And if you write down this particular website, you can actually go and read about your 4-letter code because each of these letters interacts with one another to create what is your default personality code. And I will tell you that the more your letters are like your partner, the more they're going to understand when you're sitting at the kitchen table not paying attention. Because, I mean, I'll tell you the truth now, my husband is also an intuitive personality type, so we can sit at the kitchen table, talk to each other, neither one of us is listening and neither one of us is offended because we get it, okay? But if one of us was an S, we might really be offended by that and have to work that out. So you might want to write down this. If you want to read more about your particular personality code, you can do that because that website has a lot of useful things to do that. So that brings me to, we talked a lot about differences, how our personalities might be different. And you will talk to people and some people will say, well, you know, opposites attract. And when I marry someone or my partner is someone who is very different from me, that could be a good thing because they might help me to be able to do things I couldn't do. They fill my weakness. So together we become strong. And other people might say, yeah, but if you're not alike enough, then you're going to fight all the time because you don't have anything in common. And the truth is, both of those positions are correct because it's not really about either one of those things. It's about how you communicate. So whenever we're talking about our different personality types, it doesn't matter whether we're alike or we're different as long as we communicate about those things in a kind, loving way. That gives us, remember, the unity of spirit. So I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions that I'm going to come back to here in a few minutes. But the first one is to use I messages. Right? Let's say that I am really not very happy with my spouse because he didn't take out the trash. And I walk in the kitchen and I've told him, I need you to take out the trash. And I'm really irritated when I walk in there and it's not done. And the first thing that goes through my mind is, man, you're so lazy. Why didn't you take out the trash? Well, that's not a very nice thing to say, but it's what's going through my mind. Now, if I say that, and you'll see here in a minute when we get to the Four Horsemen, when I say that, that is going to not be very helpful for my relationship. So instead, what I say is an I message. Because the truth is, if I'm upset about the trash being in the kitchen, it's not about my partner. It's really about me and how I feel. Because other people wouldn't even care. Other people come over, they don't even notice that trash in there. So it's about me and how I feel. So I need to learn to use I messages. And an example of that would be, I feel really frustrated and overwhelmed. I can't get everything done. And I really appreciate it when you pitch in and help me. Would you mind taking that trash out? It's a much, much more honest way of saying something, because then it's about me and not about criticizing my partner. Also, train your brain to think differently. Learn to compliment your partner. There's a fellow out there, his name is John Gottman, and he says that for every one negative thing that you say or do in your relationship, you need to have 5 positives. It's like a bank account. When you make a deposit into your emotional bank account, if you have 5 things in there, you can withdraw 1 and it's okay. Everything's still going to be good. But when you don't have 5 things in there, it becomes negative. So you learn to compliment. And when I say compliment, I don't mean necessarily talking about, oh, you look nice. Although for some people, we'll talk about love languages. That's a really good thing to say. But what I'm really talking about when I say compliment is the things about your partner that make them a truly unique, wonderful human being. Like, you are so empathetic. You are so kind. Those things that really drew you to your partner. So learning to communicate like that can be very, very helpful. All right, I'm going to move on to here. So now let's move to number 3. Differences in conflict. What happens when we do get into these conflicts, and how do we respond appropriately? I talked about a couple of them, the I messages that we're going to draw on now. Have you ever been in an argument with your partner and you started arguing and saying things, and before long you realized that what you were talking and fighting about really had nothing to do with the real problem that you had? That is what we call the dance. And it's basically, you can do this. You can think about the last argument that you had, and you can fill in the blank. When you get, for an example, angry, I withdraw and leave. When you get critical, I get defensive. And it's like a dance. And we have learned that when we do this with couples, it's like a dance that they follow every single time. It becomes a pattern. One person responds this way, the other person responds that way. And the argument escalates and cycles out of control. This is really bad. And the best thing you can do to help your relationship and to communicate better is to stop what we call the Four Horsemen. A fellow named John Gottman, he researched 130 couples. And what he found is that after putting them in what he called a love lab and listening to how they responded to each other in a conflict situation, he could predict with 90% certainty which couples would get divorced in a little over 5 years. 90% certainty. And what was he looking at? What we call the Four Horsemen when the dance begins. When you get critical, I get defensive. Those Four Horsemen: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. The trump is contempt. If you really don't want to be with your partner in 5 years, according to John Gottman, the number one thing you can do is show contempt. So let's look at what those things are and what the antidote are to these 4 things. Right, the first one is criticism. And this is where you're verbally attacking their personality or their character. So I gave you some example on the left there. You always talk about yourself. Why are you so selfish? And the antidote is to then use those I messages, and that's why I went over those earlier that we talked about. You might say something like, I'm feeling left out of our talk tonight and I need to vent. Can we please talk about my day? So basically what you're doing is you're talking about yourself instead of criticizing your partner. So that's criticism, the first of the four horsemen. The second one, contempt. This is the one that, I mean, if you want to eliminate one thing in your relationship that's going to make it better, it's get rid of contempt. And this is like having those thoughts of that you are having moral high ground over your partner. You are superior in some way. You attack their sense of self with an intent to insult or abuse. And here's what it sounds like. It's that you forgot to load the dishwasher again. Ugh, you're so incredibly lazy, and you roll your eyes. Things like sarcasm, cynicism, all of that falls under contempt. It is the most dangerous thing in a relationship. So what do you do to get rid of this? Remember I said change the way you think? Come up with that bank account? I have what I call solution-focused thinking, and I always remember when I'm irritated at my partner, no one is all good and no one is all bad. And I have a choice. I can focus on their good qualities, or I can focus on this one rare negative thing that drives me crazy. So I train my brain to then focus on the positive things instead. So this is what you do. That's the antidote. Remind yourself of their positive qualities. Find gratitude for the things that they have done for you in the past. And the example, the antidote, I understand you've been busy lately, but could you please remember to load the dishwasher when I work late? I'd really appreciate it. Gratitude, appreciation, affection, and respect. That's the antidote to contempt. The third of the horsemen is defensiveness. This is where you probably have done something wrong, but you're not willing to take responsibility, so you try to shift the blame, and you make yourself the victim. And you blame your partner for something that really, if you just take responsibility for it, it's not that big of a deal. Try to see things through their eyes. Here's the example. It's not my fault we're going to be late. It's your fault since you always get dressed at the last second. And the antidote, the better response, I don't like being late, but you're right. We don't always have to leave so early. I can be a little bit more flexible. And you know, it's kind of like, it's a joke. My dad, he always said he could be right or he could be happy. And it's almost like when you look at that, there's a little bit of truth to that. Then the fourth one is stonewalling. And this is where someone just totally withdraws and they create a lot of anxiety in their partner because they just walk away and it's avoidance. There's a difference between that and cooling off. The major thing here is if you need to cool down, then that is a wonderful thing. John Gottman says that when they would stop people in the love lab and tell them they needed to adjust microphones and that sort of thing and make them wait about 15 minutes, they would calm down and they would be able to talk rationally with one another again. So there's nothing wrong with cooling off, as long as you do two things. One, you let your partner know what you're doing. You don't just leave. You say, I need some space. I'll be back in 15 or 30 minutes or whatever you need. But you don't just leave. And then the second thing that you have to remember is when you're away, self-soothe. Don't be thinking about negative things about your partner. Don't sit there and stew over all of this stuff. And don't be thinking the worst, the negative, and going through all of the other horsemen while you're out there. Truly do just stop and maybe do some prayer, some meditation, whatever you need to do to self-soothe. So those are the four horsemen. And one of the ways that also is helpful when couples are trying to strengthen their relationship is to look at how we show love to one another. And there's a guy named John Chapman out there, and John Chapman wrote a book about love languages. Some of you are probably familiar with these. But I always remember a session where I was in a session and the couple I was with had an anniversary. And she was absolutely furious because she said it was our anniversary and he didn't even remember and get me a gift. And he interjects and says, I don't know what she's talking about because I cooked dinner and I spent the entire day with her. So what we have happening here is we have one partner who the way that they want to receive love is through gifts or gifting. And we had another partner who thought that the way that he would probably want and showed love was to give quality time and acts of service. So let's look at what some of these are, and I'll give you some examples. So words of affirmation. There are people who, in order to really feel loved by their partner, they need to hear things from their partner that are genuine, that show appreciation, that show that they are cared about. So how do you communicate with someone who really needs words of affirmation? Send a note, a text, a card, encourage them genuinely and often. And when we think about the Four Horsemen, absolutely do not criticize someone when they need a word of affirmation, because this is how they both give and show love. And when you criticize them, that becomes criticism becomes a really dark horseman for this type of person. The second type of love language is physical touch. And these are people who need to have kissing, holding hands, intimacy. They use body language to just express love. And to them, that is absolutely the most giving thing we can do. We tend to be the type of people that the way we want to receive love is the way we give love. And that makes sense because when we really care about somebody, we want to do what makes them feel really good about themselves. We want to make them feel good. So we assume everybody's like us. And so we begin to give love in a way that would make us feel really good, forgetting that, remember those personality differences, that everyone is different. And so it's important to know what your partner's love language is. If you are with a partner who physical touch is their love language, the worst thing you can do is neglect them physically. Don't go long stints without intimacy or be affectionately cold. Don't punish them by saying, don't touch me, because that's the worst thing you can do to them. It's like saying, I don't care about you. I don't love you at all. To you, if you're not a person who receives love through physical touch, not a big deal. But to them, very, very big deal. And then receiving gifts. To the example I gave, the woman who wanted a gift, this was a really big deal because to her, this is how you show your partner that you really love them, is when it's your anniversary, your birthday, Christmas, you receive a gift. That's how someone says they love you. But to him, he didn't care whether he received a gift or not. That was not how he showed or received love. So it was just really important for them to understand that their partner was not trying to be thoughtless, not trying to be disrespectful. So if you have someone who likes receiving gifts, do those things. Give them small gifts, small gestures. Little things can make a big difference. A gift doesn't have to be something really expensive. It's just something really thoughtful to someone whose love language is receiving gifts. Then we have quality time. And these are people who receive love through time. If you're someone whose love language is quality time and I took off work to spend the day with you, that would really show you that I cared and loved you. And so one of the things that you don't want to do is avoid people who like quality time. If you're on your cell phone and your partner is someone who really needs quality time to feel loved, and even if you're sitting in the room with them and you're scanning your cell phone, you are not showing them love. And remember that it's not really about how you receive love. If you want a good relationship, It's how you give love. You find out about your partner and you give them the type of love that they wish to receive, the type that makes them feel good. And hopefully you have two partners that are both doing that, and then you have a really good relationship. The final love language that John Chapman describes is acts of service. These are things like taking out the trash, things like cooking dinner, cleaning the house, making the bed, whatever those little acts of service are that your partner would like to receive. Action phrases like "I'll help" mean the world to someone whose love language is act of service. They want to know you're with them and that you're partnered with them and that you are a team who does things together. And you'll see if you look at the chart that's on your screen, there's a list of things to avoid. And the final thing under acts of service is making the requests of others a higher priority than them. I remember a couple one time who, it was Christmas and it was time to put up the Christmas tree, and she went over and helped her mother put up the Christmas tree before she helped her partner put up the Christmas tree. Caused all kinds of conflict because she didn't understand that she was with her partner who wanted acts of service, and that really was a very big deal. So it's important when we're trying to have unity in our relationship that we do our best to try and understand our partner and to give them love the way they want to be loved. If this interests you and you want to know more about love languages, you want to know what's my love language, what's my partner's love language, you'll want to write down this website. This is John Chapman's website. There is a quiz on there. I'm not going to have you take it on here because of time tonight, but you certainly can do that after we log off tonight. You might want to log on there and just take a quick quiz so you can see if you and your partner are on the same page and how they want to receive love. It's a great way to strengthen your relationship because if you've never thought about this before and you've always wondered, like at Christmas, maybe you buy your partner a gift and you've always wondered, why aren't they into this like I am? Could be their love language is just different than yours. So finally, number 5, the key to happiness, which like I told you at the beginning, I wish I could tell you the key to happiness, but I do want to make sure that I leave you with some particular things that we talked about tonight to just help you to have a stronger, more unified relationship and to be able to show each other love better. Number 1, have empathy for your partner's personality deficits. Stop criticism and contempt that come from this. Remember, like I told you earlier tonight, that your partner's personality is different than yours. And they are probably not doing the things that are annoying you just out of disrespect. They're doing it because that's just who they are. And I will tell you, as someone who sits at the kitchen table and is not paying attention, it is not because I don't care about my husband. It is because that's just the way I was born. And if you don't come up and pretty much slap me in the face and get me out of my head, that's just the way I am. And there's nothing I can do about that because it is like your computer screen. When you turn your computer off, you know that it goes right back instantly without even thinking about it. It goes right back to that same picture, that default computer screen. And that's the way your personality is. If you aren't constantly thinking about being different than you are, you're going right back. The minute you relax, you go right back to that default. And we can't all be on high alert all the time. We all have to have that downtime where we can just be at our default. And that's usually when we're at home, because when we're at work, we have to be on high alert. And for our own mental health, we need those times where we can just be in our default. So cut them some slack and have some empathy for the fact that that's just who they are. And they do care about you, even though they have their own unique personality. Number 2, communicate and don't dance. If you get into conflict and you notice that you are doing that dance with your partner, where it becomes that pattern of emotions that I do this, you do this. I do this, you do this. Then think about those I messages. Think about complimenting your partner. Think about those antidotes that we talked about and how you can reframe things and make it sound a whole lot better and get rid of those four horsemen, which is number 3. Eliminate the four horsemen. And I will tell you, particularly contempt. Eliminate. If you do nothing else tonight after hearing what I've talked to you about, go home and make a determination that contempt is no longer going to be a part of your life. You're going to change the way you think about your partner. You're going to start changing your brain so that you're thinking about their positive aspects, and you're going to get rid of sarcasm, cynicism, all of those things that make it seem like you have a moral high ground over your partner. Number 4, show love through your partner's preferred language. Find out, how do they want to receive love? Is it gifts? Is it acts of service? Is it physical touch? And make special attention to show them love the way they want to be loved rather than the way you want to be loved. Number 5, but also accept love through your partner's preferred love language. Remember, they go on default. They're trying to do something nice for you. So remember that they're just not you. They're different than you. Their personality is different than yours, and they're trying to give you love. And number 6, be grateful every day and show appreciation to your partner. If these things interest you and you want to learn more, at the end of the PowerPoint, I've written some of my favorite books on here, things that cover some of the topics I talked about tonight. The first one is Gary Chapman's 5 Love Languages. The second one, this is one of the best 2 books I have ever read about relationships. There is one called For Women Only and one called For Men Only. And she actually writes one of them with her husband, the one that's for men only. So it's actually coming from a male perspective. And she studied thousands of people to find out exactly what is going on with men and women in relationships. And I highly recommend that book. It comes from a Christian perspective. The third book I recommend is John Gottman's The Marriage Clinic and What Makes Love Last. And then finally, I put the website. So if you want to go read more about the Four Horsemen and the antidotes, you can certainly do that on here. Well, I really appreciate your time. My hope tonight is that I said something that made a difference for you, and that you can take anything that I said and strengthen your relationship with your partner. So we have a few minutes left. If you have any questions or comments, I am happy to answer to the best of my ability. Or I believe John's on here. I'm teasing. I'm teasing. Any questions that you have? I might look at the chat, see if there's anything in there. Yes, your 4-letter code changes very little over your whole lifespan. Your default is typically who you are throughout your life. Although it is kind of interesting that there have been some studies. There's a guy, Grant, who studied the 4 personality types we talked about tonight, and he says that as you age, you are able to move in and out of those personality types more and more. And by the time you're 50 years old, you've gotten to where if you're an introvert truly by default, you can put on that face and be an extrovert if you need to with any of those 4 personality types. But according to that researcher, it takes until you're 50 years old to be able to do that. And I don't know, I can relate to that because before I was 50 years old, I know it was a lot more difficult for me to do that. And if you're younger than that, well, it just tells you have something to look forward to. Aging's not all bad. Yes, extroverts are definitely having a tough year, Clay. There is no doubt about that. Introverts, we all need to be really helpful to extroverts because they need some support right now. Yes, you can have a whole lot more than one love language. In fact, when you take the quiz, if you go to that website, you'll find that you will have a top 3, and it will rank order them for you so that you can know what your preferred second and third choice is. And somebody asked, they said, what if you're both on that personality type? Well, I will tell you that little quiz that we gave, I cannot plagiarize because of copyright. I cannot give you an actual Myers-Briggs on here without charging you about $85 each, which I know we don't have during a pandemic. So that was my own creation. And without going into a lot of psychobabble jargon, I will just tell you it's imperfect. And if you wanted to know exactly what your code was, you would have to take that Myers-Briggs personality code. It has more questions. It's much, much more accurate than what I gave you. But this was a really good way to just at least get a snapshot of maybe where you fit. Anyone else? Oh, and on the personality code, I have my husband here and he's helping me see. So I always have to remember that that's his default personality. You can be a very, very strong J, or somewhere on a continuum, it can be strong to weak and move to the other side over to the P. And that's true with introversion, extroversion, any of those 4 letters on the code. And some people are almost in the middle between the two, and it's really hard to choose. The creators of that Myers-Briggs, they say you have to be one or the other. But I've met several people that, frankly, it's really hard to know. They're right in the middle. I think if you're in the middle, you're actually pretty blessed because you can see the world through 2 sets of eyes. You can see both perspectives. So that may be a good thing for you. Yeah, a lot of us are in the middle. A lot of us. I know with T and F, I'm right in the middle between T and F. So I kind of, and by the way, if you're a female who came out with a T, you are exceptionally rare. That most females do not come out with a T. And if you're a male who came out with an F, that's also rare. So, all right. Well, guys, I really appreciate your time. Let's see, I have one more thing. I've taken the real thing several times. Oh, that's good, Stephanie. ENFP and wants ESTP. Do you think when we feel in esteem or not, this can affect scores? You know, they say no, but it could be that you're right in the middle on some of those letters. Obviously, you have an E that's pretty solid. Between N and S, you might be right in the middle, and it could just be how you answered the questions when you take it. F and T, you may be just like me. You may be right smack in the middle, but you have a pretty firm E and P. So, yeah, I imagine you're just kind of right in the center. Well, that's good. That's good. Okay. Okay. Well, great. Well, I appreciate you guys very much. I hope you got something out of this, and I hope you have a wonderful night. And if you want to, I will send this PowerPoint to Lauren so she'll have it as soon as we get done here.
Dr. Hicks, thank you so much.
Don't forget to come back for the next 2 weeks because I know John was on here and he's going to do a great job. So.
Thank you, Dr. Hicks, so much from Belmont University for joining us tonight and spending your time with us. And thank you for everyone who logged on and who registered. It's so great to see so many folks working on their relationships.